I feel like I just need to get this off my chest, even if no one believes me. Last year, I moved into a small apartment on the outskirts of town. The conditions were almost perfect affordable rent, a decent neighborhood, friendly neighbors. I was just starting my new job and I wanted something quiet and private. I thought it was the beginning of a new chapter in my life, a new home, a new job, and finally a chance to live the way I wanted. At first, everything was indeed peaceful. I was settling in, buying furniture, and getting used to my new routine. But within a month, strange things started happening. They were subtle, almost unnoticeable at first, except for one detail that caught my attention. It was my toothbrush. Every evening when I came home, I'd find it wet, even if I had left it dry in the morning. At first, I thought I was just forgetting, but soon I started noticing more. One night, I heard a strange sound coming from the bathroom, like someone was breathing very quietly. It wasn't a full breath in or out, more like a held, muffled breath. I froze, listening, trying to convince myself that my mind was playing tricks on me, but the sound repeated. I thought maybe there was an issue with the pipes or trapped air, something that could be fixed later, but the feeling that someone was watching me stayed. A couple of weeks later, I started noticing that my things were out of place. It was subtle at first, a mug not where I'd left it, a book that I remembered putting on the table, but now it was on the nightstand. I chalked it up to tiredness and absent-mindedness, but soon it became clear that something was off. One day, coming home, I found my planner open on the page with my passwords written down. I distinctly remembered closing it. That worried me. If someone was in my apartment while I was gone, that was serious. I even changed the lock. For a while, everything was quiet again. I convinced myself that I was just overthinking. There was nothing strange about feeling jumpy from stress and exhaustion. I nearly forgot about it until something happened that threw me off completely. Late one night, almost at dawn, I woke up to a noise in my bedroom. At first, I thought it was the usual nighttime sounds, the creak of the bed, noises from neighbors. But then I heard a rustling sound right next to my bed. My heart started pounding, and I tried to turn over to see what was happening. In the dim light from the street lamp outside, I saw a shadow standing motionless by my bed. I couldn't see a face, just the outline of a figure, and its presence felt absolutely real. I froze and a thought flashed through my mind. This can't be real. I'm just dreaming. I lay completely still, staring at the shadow, too afraid to move. Then the shadow took a step back and disappeared through the doorway. When I woke up in the morning, I tried to convince myself it was just a nightmare. No one had come into my room. It was just a dream. But deep down, I felt it had been real. The next day, I decided to set up a camera in the hallway, pointing at the entrance. I didn't even want to check the footage, but when I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still around, I looked at it. All I saw was myself coming and going. Nothing strange. Everything seemed normal, at least at first glance. One night, however, I woke up in complete darkness, though I always left the night light on. In that darkness, I heard breathing. This time it was right next to me, as if someone was standing there, breathing softly and slowly, trying not to wake me. Panic washed over me and I blindly reached for the light, but I couldn't find it in the dark. Suddenly the light turned on, and I saw that I was alone in the room, but one thought kept nagging at me. If these were hallucinations, why did they feel so real? Over time, the sounds became more pronounced. I could hear faint footsteps, and I couldn't ignore them anymore. But the strangest part, once again there was nothing on the footage. My head began to ache from the constant tension and panic that I couldn't explain. The final straw was one morning when I found my mug filled with water on the kitchen counter. It was sitting there as if someone had left it there, knowing I'd find it. And then it hit me, the person behind all of this knew me too well. I would left the mug on the table, not in the kitchen, but this person seemed to think for me, adapting to my habits. One of the last nights I spent in that apartment, I woke up with a heavy feeling on my chest, as if someone was sitting on me. I couldn't breathe, barely able to move, and all I could hear was the faintest, almost imperceptible breathing. Desperate, I reached for my phone to turn on the light, only to discover it was dead, even though I had charged it before bed. Overcome with panic, I bolted up and ran out of the room. I moved out of the apartment the very next day without looking back. It's been almost a year now. I live in the city center again, surrounded by people, noise, and constant movement. Sometimes I feel like I've finally escaped those nights, but the feeling that someone is watching me hasn't disappeared. Occasionally, in the middle of the night, I hear footsteps by my door, faint breathing, and I feel again that the one who is with me knows me better than I know myself. I don't usually share this story because even now I'm not entirely sure I believe it happened. Maybe something in me broke back then, making me see things that weren't really there. Or maybe that something is still within me. 2 years ago, I decided to rent an apartment closer to the city center. It was in an old neighborhood with most buildings dating back to pre-war times. The price and location appealed to me, and I didn't think twice about it. In the photos, the apartment looked cozy with a few vintage touches. At the time, I found it rather charming. During my first meeting with the landlady, I felt a slight unease. She was an elderly woman, very quiet yet oddly insistent on certain things. She practically demanded that I keep the windows closed after sunset. The look in her eyes at that moment unsettled me. They were filled with worry and a kind of hidden anxiety. I brushed it off, nodding to appease her. But after moving in, things began to feel off. On my very first evening, I noticed that the apartment's walls seemed to absorb sound. It felt as if I were in a capsule cut off from the world. I could only hear a faint noise from the street, like a paused film. Everything was muted, as if life around me had been severed. The first few nights passed relatively peacefully, but a strange feeling grew within me. I became overwhelmed by a vague sense of dread, one I couldn't explain or ignore. Every evening, after sunset, the apartment started to feel foreign. It was as if I were trying to live inside an old, faded photograph each day. The walls seemed to press in on me more. The space narrowed and the air grew heavier. And one day, I noticed that something in the apartment had indeed changed. I'd gotten used to the large old mirror hanging in the bathroom. It was a bit worn, like all the furniture, but I didn't pay it much attention until one evening when I noticed something strange. Passing by the mirror, it seemed like it wasn't quite reflecting what I was seeing. For a split second, I thought I saw movement, but I chalked it up to fatigue. Then the oddities began to escalate. Whenever I stood in front of the mirror for a little longer, I felt a slight discomfort, sometimes an outright urge to look away. I didn't understand what was happening. It felt as if the reflection was slowly but surely changing. It was still my face, but something about it was. It's hard to put into words, but each time I looked into the mirror, I felt I was seeing something alien. Then things started happening that were hard to explain. One night, I woke up feeling as though someone was watching me. That strange feeling that someone was in the apartment with me grew stronger. I went to the kitchen to get a glass of water, and that's when I noticed the bathroom door slightly ajar. The light was off, but something gleamed inside. When I got closer, I realized it was the mirror. I just stared, and for a moment I saw someone standing next to me in the reflection. It lasted only a fraction of a second, but I remember it vividly. It was as if my vision failed me, whether from exhaustion or anxiety, I don't know, but it seemed that someone was indeed standing beside me. I turned on the light abruptly, and of course, no one was there. Yet my heart wouldn't calm down, beating wildly. I went back to bed, but once again awoke to that same feeling of unease. The sense that someone else was in the apartment intensified to the point of panic. After that, the nightmares began. Almost every night, I dreamt the same thing. I was standing in front of the mirror, and my reflection would start moving before I did. At first, I thought it was just stress. But then I noticed I couldn't even look at that mirror during the day for more than a few seconds. It felt as if it was watching me back. The turning point came when I came home late one evening to find that the mirror had shifted. Initially, I thought someone had broken into the apartment. I searched the place, but there were no signs of forced entry. Yet I distinctly remember seeing that the mirror had been moved, as if someone had tried to reposition it. I stood before it feeling a growing sense of terror within. Day by day, my paranoia increased. Each time I walked past the mirror, I could almost physically feel my reflection watching me. I don't know how else to describe it, but it felt as if there was something beyond just my face behind that piece of glass. So I decided to act. One evening, I took the mirror and placed it in the hallway. But even this didn't bring me peace. The feeling of a presence didn't disappear. In fact, my fear of the mirror only grew stronger. One night I woke up to the sound of something creaking outside my door. Opening it, I saw the mirror had returned to its original place, standing exactly where it had been before. I have no idea how it got back. Maybe I was just so exhausted that I'd moved it myself and forgotten. But in the morning, I noticed a few small cuts on my hand, thin red lines that looked almost like marks I'd left in that space. A few days later, I packed my things and left. I didn't tell the landlady about any of this. I just handed her the keys and left without looking back. But the strange feeling didn't go away. For a few months I stayed with friends, but every time I saw my reflection in any mirror, I felt that same fear rising within me. Now I live somewhere else and there isn't a single mirror in my home. If I had heard this story from someone else, I probably wouldn't have believed it. But when you live through it yourself, when every moment you feel the chill of fear creeping through you, skepticism isn't really an option. I'll try to tell everything as it happened. I moved into a new apartment last year. A one-bedroom on the outskirts of the city, fairly expensive, but the amenities made it worth it. A spacious room, large kitchen, and windows overlooking a park. It felt like the perfect place, and everything seemed to fall into place. The neighbors whom I met on the first day seemed friendly, a pair of elderly people with their daughter and a boy around 12. A sweet, quiet family. Nothing suspicious, no cause for concern. But just a couple of weeks in, I noticed that things had started to move on their own. At first, I thought I was simply forgetting where I'd put things and blamed it on my absent-mindedness. But one evening, coming home from work, I found that my phone wasn't where I'd left it that morning. I only felt mild surprise at that point, thinking maybe I'd misremembered. However, as time passed, this happened more often. Another odd detail. Every evening I would smell a faint hint of tobacco in the hallway. I don't smoke, nor do my neighbors, so I couldn't explain it. It seemed like a small thing, but something deep down started to make me uneasy. As time went on, one day I noticed my keys were in a different spot than where I usually left them. I was certain I'd left them on the shelf by the entrance the night before, but in the morning they were on the kitchen counter. I blamed it on fatigue and stress, but still the feeling of unease grew. The real horror began a few months later when I suddenly felt like I wasn't alone in the apartment. One night as I was drifting off to sleep, I thought I heard someone quietly moving in the hallway. I listened but heard nothing and convinced myself it was just the house settling. But the next morning, I woke up with a gut-wrenching feeling that something was wrong. Dust on the hallway shelves looked smudged as though someone had run a finger along them. Someone other than me. Another night, I woke up in the middle of the night to a strange noise and saw that the hallway light was on. I was absolutely certain I turned it off before going to bed. The feeling that someone was moving around in my apartment became unbearable. But I still tried to convince myself that it was just my nerves, exhaustion, stress. The next day, I decided to install a small motion sensor light that would turn on if someone walked down the hall. I wanted to be sure that I was imagining things. The sensor was sensitive enough to detect even the slightest movement, even if someone walked across the far side of the room. This calmed me down a little. For a few days, the sensor remained off, and I almost convinced myself that my fears were groundless. But one day, coming home, I noticed that the light was on again, even though the sensor was supposed to turn it off automatically after a few minutes. I stood in the hallway, feeling an icy chill run down my spine. It was obvious that someone really was moving around in my apartment. Several more days passed, and I started sleeping restlessly, waking up at every little sound. My sleep was disrupted by strange noises that at first seemed like just my imagination playing tricks. There was a faint knocking. Not loud, barely noticeable, as if someone was gently tapping the wall. And one night, I distinctly heard someone slowly opening the closet in my bedroom. In complete darkness, holding my breath, I listened, waiting for something more. But when I finally mustered the courage to turn on the light, the room was empty. The closet was indeed slightly open. A week later, I decided to add another layer of security, small surveillance cameras in the corners of the apartment. Now I was certain I'd be able to see if something went wrong. The first few nights, the recordings showed nothing. But on the fourth day, I found something I still can't forget. The recording showed me peacefully sleeping, and in the room next to my bed, a shadow appeared. It stood completely still, as if watching me. The camera caught only part of the silhouette, which disappeared almost immediately. I played the footage several times, trying to understand what it could be, but each replay only made it scarier. I wasn't alone. The next morning, I decided to leave the apartment, but something drew me back. I felt like I needed to know, to figure out who or what was watching me. I left the light on, and trying to suppress my fear, I went to bed. That night, I woke up with the feeling that someone was standing by the bedroom door. I could hear faint, barely perceptible breathing, but I couldn't bring myself to open my eyes. In the morning, I packed my things and left. I didn't investigate further, didn't ask questions. All that remains of that apartment are memories that still haunt me. And you know what the scariest part is? Sometimes sitting at home or walking around the city, I still feel that faint presence nearby.